family. We bought the rights to a book. We watched all the archive because Paul Raymond did a lot of stuff. He had quite a big public image, quite into kind of PR and the kind of brand of Paul Raymond. So there's a lot of stuff that of him projecting an image of himself. And really, the whole process was probably 2 or 3 years before it became clear we were actually going to make the film.
I mean, it's the fourth time you'd worked with Steve Coogan. You made 24 Hour Party People, Cock and Bull Story, The Trip, and you're going to go and do another trip in Italy this summer with him as well. So you obviously enjoyed not only making films with him, but those discussions as well. But beforehand, what is it that why did you get on so well, do you think, as director, actor?
I mean, I think, when you're working with, in any context, it's really nice to work with people you know. So a lot of the crew that we work with are kind of the same. A lot of the people in the office, the production staff are the same. It can be really hard with actors sometimes to work with them over and over again because you have to have exactly the right part for an actor. You can't just think, I like this actor, I'll stick him in any part, or her in any part. I guess with Steve, it's always been kind of, in a way, films have been moulded around him. He's been the central character. It's been, we'd be able to kind of pick projects where he feels like Steve's the right person. I think, with Steve, he's really easy to work with. But he's always trying out new stuff. He's very relaxed. He'll try new stuff on set. He's good at improvising. I think with Steve and with a lot of comedians, they're very good at kind of generating their own material. They're not they're not just dependent on the script. They're used to developing characters, writing their own material, doing stand-up and so on. So that means that they're kind of very good at adding stuff to the project. And I like improvising, so it's fun.
Great. Let's start taking some questions from out there. If you can throw your hands up, I'll set some questions. There's a real glare on the lights. I'm struggling to see anybody out there. I can see a hand up there, right in the back in the gallery. Thank you very much. Up there. And then just keep your hand up and wave it around. And I want to set up a couple more as well, there's one. We're really going to make the volunteer. There's only one microphone.
Hello.
Fine. Okay, go on.
This obviously isn't the first time you've made a film about real people. I was really interested to know, do you feel under a lot of pressure when you make films about real people? Do you find it constraining, or is it something that you really enjoy doing?
And a sense of responsibility, maybe?
Yeah, I think you should feel responsible. I think you should try and, we try and be as we try and be as respectful of the real situation, the real characters, the real story as possible. But actually, I think for me, it's also quite liberating because if you're creating a complete fiction, there's a lot of pressure that every aspect of the fiction should kind of make sense. It should all be coherent. It should, if one character pops in one part of the story, they've got to kind of have some payoff later. The character has to go on some sort of journey. There has to be a very kind of clear kind of structure to the story, and you have to, and everything is like there's a kind of economy to the film that you have to. It all has to make sense. It all has to be quite neat. And what I like about real stories is that you can use as an excuse the fact that actually the story takes place over 50 years, and he has this relationship, and he has another relationship, and he has this relationship to his daughter, and this relationship to his son, and so on. That it allows you to actually have a kind of messier narrative. And and obviously that means maybe in terms of watching the film that makes it a little bit more awkward. But I think it makes I think there's something of that kind of classic kind of 3-act kind of film, the kind of classic narrative, the character arc and the journey of the central character and how they've learned something that I find doesn't really correspond to real life. Doesn't really make me. When I watch those kind of stories, I don't really feel that is how I experience life. So what I like about those stories is that it gives you a bit of freedom actually, because you have to be true to the real people, you have to be true to the events, but it gives you some freedom from the traditional kind of fictional shape of a film.
Thank you. I think there was another question. There was a hand around here. If there's still a question. Yep, great. Thank you.
Hi.
Keep your hands up if you want to ask a question, please, just so we can get the microphone around. Thanks.
I was very impressed with Steve Coogan's performance just then, and I haven't seen all the films that he's done, but do you think he would become getting more and more involved, rather than the comedy, more and more involved in serious roles, like? That wasn't really a comedy, was it? There was humour, but it was
So I guess
very impressive.
I guess to steal that question.
I'll pass out. Good. I'll pass it on to Steve. He'll be very happy to hear that. He does want to do other stuff that's not comedy. And he's just done a film with Stephen Frears directing with Judi Dench, which I think is not, as I understand, is not a comedy at all. It's a completely straight role.
It's with Philomena. And he co-wrote it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. I think Steve's a really good actor, and I think like a lot of comedians, his acting's a bit underrated, really. It's like it's very hard to see natural in a film. It's very hard to kind of portray a version of yourself in a film, and I think I've worked with a lot of actors who are kind of famous as kind of good serious actors, but I think Steve is at least as good as any of them. He's a really sensitive performer, I think.
Thank you. I can see someone else with the microphone up there. Thanks.
Sorry. What led you to cast Imogen as the daughter?
So why Imogen Poots as Debbie?
It's always difficult to talk about casting because in the end, really, you meet people, you try and choose the people you think are best for the roles, and it's a very subjective judgment, and often you're just sort of guessing, and you have to hope it works out well. When you're doing a real story, there's always a slight element of like how different or how similar are they physically to the person, how similar or different they are in age. But in particular with Debbie, kind of wanted someone who you could engage with. Debbie, a lot of things that Debbie did were perhaps quite self-destructive. I wanted someone who would make you'd still feel for her, you still understand, you'd still feel that relationship between the father and daughter, even if a lot of things they do you don't kind of agree with or think are right, but there's still, you kind of feel like there is a bond between them, and that therefore you kind of when that's broken, you kind of feel for them. So I thought Imogen, I think Imogen's really kind of sensitive and sympathetic actor, and I guess that was the choice. But in truth, it is a very sort of subjective thing. You meet lots of people across all the parts. You try to find a group that you feel will make sense together. And I thought Steve and Imogen would work together. I thought the contrast to say with Anna Field would be great, and the balance of the cast would be good.
Thank you. I think someone else has got the microphone up there. Thanks. Do throw your hand up if you want to ask a question afterwards.
You said that you were lucky enough to talk to members of his family, and I was just wondering if you'd had feedback from them of how they thought they'd all been portrayed and things like that.
Sorry, I can't see who's asking the question, but
Top, I think,
I'd say I've done a lot of films based on real stories, and this was probably one of the more problematic ones from that point of view. There didn't seem to be that many people who were really close to Paul Raymond, so it wasn't as though you could get a huge number of opinions of people that really knew him well. And all those opinions we got tended to be quite contradictory. It wasn't as though everyone kind of said the same things about him, so you gradually built up a coherent picture. Everyone said totally different things about him. And then there were also some specific things that were quite problematic about the family. So, as you see in the film, the kind of family is quite has some divisions anyway. There were kind of divisions within the family, obviously between Paul and Jean, but then in a way their children kind of carried on those divisions, so that complicated things. We met up with Howard at the very beginning of the process, maybe 3-4 years ago, but Howard was already trying to make a different film about his dad. So we had a very kind of civil lunch, but he didn't want to talk to us in any detail because he was working with another film company. Fiona Richmond, who's obviously kind of very close to Paul, she also knew Howard and knew that Howard's working on another film, so we tried to contact her at the beginning of the whole process, and she didn't want to be contacted. And then we met Fiona like 6 weeks before we started filming, and she then met Tamsin, and she came on set and so on, but it was quite late in the day. With people like Carl Snitcher, the lawyer, that James Lance plays. James here somewhere. I think James talked to Carl, and we talked to Carl, and Carl, gave us some bits and pieces of help and came and watched the film. But the people that were closest to him that we kind of really got, had most contact with John James, as the son-in-law, kind of ran the business for a long period of time, and Fawn and India, the granddaughter. So Fawn is a character in the film, and they came on set and they kind of helped us with getting access to Soho, and they've seen the film. And then, the good thing was that they always, said that they thought Steve was giving a really kind of accurate portrayal of the grandfather. It was someone that they loved, and so we kind of, they were the members of the family that we have most contact with.
Hi
Thank
there.
you.
Sorry, Michael. Divine seemed to be an influence on Matt Lucas, his character. Were there any other influences on Matt Lucas's character?
Well, no, Matt Lucas is playing Divine. I mean, Divine was what came over to London and played that part in the play. So he is playing Divine. Sorry, I can't really see who's asking questions, but so he is playing Divine.
Thank you. We've got time for another couple more questions. Is the microphone with somebody already? Or great, if you can throw your hand up over there. If someone else can throw their hand up, that'll be the final question.
Hi there. I was wondering at what point during the production did you decide you were going to take a quite unique approach to the tone of the film? Because as somebody mentioned earlier, it's a very dramatic story. There's a lot of tragedy in Paul Raymond's life story, but as we could see, a lot of quite humour in the film as well. And you've got a lot of cameos from well-known comedians. At what point did you decide that was the tone you were going to take?
So how do you get the balance right, really? I mean, obviously you're dealing with a difficult father-daughter relationship, but you're dealing with a world of entertainment and fun as well.
I mean, I suppose from the beginning there seemed to be some, a kind of an element of the story is that Paul Raymond wanted to be an entertainer. He started off with a sort of mind-reading act, and then he wasn't very good at that, and he became an impresario. So he kind of was in the world of entertainment, and obviously the kind of nightclubs, even the magazines, it's that kind of, the idea is there's a sort of sense of a kind of glossy surface that's attractive, that seems to be fun. And then the private life for us, was inside that. So quite early on, the idea that the King Midas story is a sort of kind of very crude kind of version of like what happened to his life. That that you could have all material success, but you lose people close to you was an element of it. And I guess it kind of felt to me that because it spans 50 years, 40 years, 50 years. And has these kind of ups and downs, brushes with the law, this kind of making a huge amount of money, all the things that happened to him, being accused of running prostitutes out of clubs and so on. There was a little bit like some of those kind of like early kind of novels, things like Mulflanders and so on, where you have a kind of a character that's amoral, that sort of bounces up and down, has good things happen, bad things happen, and through that kind of character's adventures, you sort of get a sense of the kind of world they live in, and that not so much that maybe that Paul Raymond kind of created Soho or created the changes, but by watching him over a period, you would see the kind of the way in which Soho changed, the way in which kind of attitudes to sex changed, the way in which London changed, and I guess that was kind of like the idea that there'd be this kind of like romp through kind of 40 years of Soho, but all the time kind of feeling that underneath that the most important thing to anyone, the relationship to their family, and that clearly. His relationship to his children, his relationship to his dad, his relationship to the women in his life was complicated. So there's always going to be a kind of movement backwards and forwards from his private life to the public life, and the film kind of bounces around between those two things. But it gets about, I'm not sure it's about balance. It's more like there's this bit, there's this bit, there's this bit, this bit, and that kind of fluctuation between the kind of the public world and the private world, and the success and the failure, and the moments of happiness and sadness again. It just felt like that should be the rhythm of the film.
Thank you. I think the final question's right up there in the gallery. I've only just realised there is a gallery up there. If you can, am I right? Is there not someone up there with a microphone? No. I'll repeat the question. The question was about the detail of the film generally. You specifically picked out the detail of Debbie doing a line in hospital. Do you mean how did the filmmakers know that happened, or? Yeah. Okay.
Well, so that's that. I mean, obviously, we as I say, we spent a couple of years doing research, talking to people. We bought the rights to a book about Paul Raymond by Paul Willits, which was called Members Only, but it's now called The Look of Love. It's available in bookshops. And there's a lot of Paul Raymond's a very public figure. So the truth is we don't know that happened, but that was reported as happening. So whilst Paul Raymond was alive. So I mean, it is a difficult area. Obviously, there's lots of stuff in anyone's life that no one really knows apart from the people who are in the room. And in that case, clearly the only people who would know whether that's true or not are dead. But it was reported at the time, and it felt like, in the context of other things we were told by lots of people about their kind of relationship and about the way they behaved together, that it felt, that was certainly plausible. And as I say, it was reported whilst he was alive, and no one ever questioned whether that was true or not. But I mean, it is a difficult area, and you try, obviously, as I say, we got to meet several times and get to know a little bit members of his family, and you want to be as kind of respectful of the truth, or as try and be as honest as possible about the story. But at the same time, you're covering the life of several people, but in particular one man over 40 or 50 years, and you try to tell it in 90 minutes. So you're having to try and find moments that condense kind of aspects of their life into something that's manageable in a very short period of time.
Just to finish up, I want to ask you about shooting this on location in London, because there's loads of outdoor scenes in Soho. This is not a film relatively made with much money at all. So you must have been battling against it to be able to cover the decades of Soho outdoors. You're in L'Escargot, Kettner's, Maison Berthaud, loads of other places as well, pubs, the French House. Were you grabbing scenes where you could at dawn on 4 a.m. on Sunday, or were you shutting Soho down?
Generally grabbing stuff. I mean, look at obviously, part of the film is about the way in which Soho has changed. Obviously, Soho has changed a lot, and Paul Raymond was part of that change. But at the same time, I think the essence of Soho is still the same. It's still a mixture of film business, bars, clubs, a few CDM clubs, part of the sex industry, and so on. So the good thing is that some of those iconic buildings are still there. So Ronnie Scott's and all the places you mentioned, we were able to film it, and they were generally incredibly helpful. Paul Raymond was obviously a very kind of very kind of iconic figure in Soho. So the fact we were making a film about him meant they were very kind of cooperative and really friendly and helped us. So all those interior things were quite easy, and I wanted to film in the real places and film in Soho. I have to say the exteriors were the opposite. The exteriors were a nightmare. So every time we went outside, as you can imagine in Soho, there's a lot of people who don't want to be stopped, don't want to be told that we're doing a little bit of filming here, can you go on the other side of the road? All around Walker's Court was quite tricky and so on. So Soho has its good side and its bad side for filming as well as everything else.
Finally there, I mean, you mentioned filming in Soho, lots of people remembered Paul Raymond. Did that mean you were surrounded by lots of stories of Paul Raymond the whole time? People coming up to you and saying, oh, in all these places we talked about there, I remember him, I remember this, or here's my opinion, or...
Yes, to a certain extent, and obviously we were searching out people who knew him. But you have to remember as well that a lot of the story happened quite a long time ago. So I mean, it is a period film. So Paul Raymond died relatively recently, but I mean, he was, it was quite funny when we did the research. People would be like, well, after the death of Debbie, he became a bit of a recluse because he just went to the office. He didn't go out to clubs anymore. He was about 65. It's like most people are not going out to clubs every night when they're 65. Most people are staying at home watching telly. So it was quite finding people's memories of a period that's 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so that was part of the fun and part of the difficulty of the process.
We're going to wrap things up there. Thanks everyone for being here. The Look of Love comes out tomorrow in cinemas. Thanks most of all to Michael Winterbottom for the film and for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you.